Hello, welcome to the Old Glory Games podcast. My name is Kyle, and this is episode 20, where we're going to talk about the top 5 female tennis players of all time. Greg and myself each give our own version of our own top 5, and you will see where we agree and where we maybe slightly disagree. It's a great discussion, but episode 20 is only going to be part 1 of this because we went so long that we have to break this up. So part 2 will actually air the last week of the US Open, which, by the way, kicks off this week. And so I hope you enjoyed this episode. It, personally, for me, is one of my favorites so far. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Old Glory Games podcast. My name is Kyle, and I'm here with Greg. And if you see me smiling here on YouTube, you know that I'm extremely excited because this is a topic that I am really, really excited to get into. This is equivalent to us talking about NASCAR for Greg. This is my NASCAR would be tennis of all things. And I watch tennis. I watch probably about 8 hours of tennis a week, minimum. That's not even that's year round. Well, that's on this topic of discussion. Greg, are you excited about this topic of the GOATs in women's tennis?
I certainly am, because I get to talk about players that I grew up watching. And as we talked about before we went on air, from the mid to late 70s through the early 90s, I watched a lot of tennis. And I definitely watched all but probably one of these ladies that we're getting ready to talk about. And in that era of tennis, it was so exciting to watch. Now, at that point, especially when in the 70s, there wasn't a whole lot to watch as far as free non-cable TV. I watched just about every sport that came on at that point. I was a sports nut back then, even at that age. So there was a lot of tennis that was on, especially the majors. I mean, I loved it when, Wimbledon came around and the US Open, and my guy was Jimmy Connors, and my favorite women's player, and I know we'll talk about her in a little while, was Chris Evert. So it was so much fun watching them play. But at that time, even as a youngster, I knew that these were great players and they were going to go down as some of the greatest players. And to be able to watch that in real time is a special thing. And I know more recently we've had Serena Williams, and she's certainly up there as far as the debate as to who the quote unquote GOAT is. But I don't watch as much tennis as I used to. But I'll still watch from time to time, especially when the Grand Slam events roll around. But I know you watch way more tennis than I do, so I know you're super excited about it. And I'm glad we can talk about it, because I don't think we've talked about tennis up until this point. So It'll be fun to stretch out a little bit and talk about something a little different at this point. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So I'll just give a little background on my history on tennis. I watched tennis the first time. It was breakfast at Wimbledon, and it was July 4th. I remember this because that's when it was. It was on TV during the morning, because the time differential from the East Coast to London, so that their 4 o'clock is like our morning. And so I'm watching a 5-set match, Borg versus McEnroe. I think it was their first one. That was the one that went 5 sets. It was a ridiculously amazing rally. And just, to me, that was what got me hooked to tennis. And I just fell in love with Bjorn Borg. He was my guy. He's still my guy overall. Women is going to be Steffi Graf, and I'm going to have a bias to Steffi Graf no matter what. But I have to give props, and I can argue a couple of these. I could argue, but I would never agree with myself that these two people could probably, or three actually, could be considered even better than Steffi Graf if you look at it from a different side of it. So, Greg, how do you want to do this? Do you want to list our top 5 or top 6, or do you want to just pick a player and just kind of just talk about them and go on to the next one? How do you want to do it?
Okay, well, we can certainly do both. So I'm going to run through my list, and I think my list and your list probably line up pretty close, and then we can go back through and talk about them individually. So
Perfect.
I've got Margaret Court, Steffi Graf, you just mentioned her, Billie Jean King, Martina Navratilova, Chris Evert, and Serena Williams.
That's a great list. That's probably my list too, actually. So if you were to say let's do this, Greg. This could be tough for you. Let's do this. Let's each pick a Mount Rushmore, the top 4. But there's going to be a couple that's not going to make that honorable mentions. So let's each go through our honorable mentions leading up to our top 4. You want to do that? And we can agree or disagree and say where we, because no one's wrong on this.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, no, we can do that. That sounds like fun. So let me count how many.
I can start. I can start. I know exactly what mine are.
Okay, so I've got 1, 2. I know you do. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's see, 5, 6. Okay. All right. So I would have to leave 2 off. And one of them, it's going to be very, very hard for me to leave her off because she was my absolute favorite women's player, and that would be Chris Evert. So I'll leave off Chris Evert and Billie Jean King. They'll be honorable mentioned, and my Mount Rushmore would be Margaret Court, Martina Navratilova, Steffi Graf, and Serena Williams.
Okay, that's not far from me.
Let's go.
So let me just. I have. How many do you have? Do you have 6?
I had 6 total. Yeah, 6.
Okay, let's keep the same list. All right, so I'm gonna put Billie Jean King on here, only because I don't have anyone else to replace her with. Actually, let me look at this list here if I can see who I have here. Let's see, Tracy Austin. Gabrielle Sabatini, Monica Seles. Oh, she was a beast, but she got injured.
Yeah.
You kind of. It's hard to leave. It's hard to leave Billie Jean King off, even if it's don't like her politically. Yeah, so we'll go with Billie Jean King as my number 6, put it that way. And let's talk about Billie Jean King. So, don't know much about her other than Billy Rig stuff. I do know that she was a founder of several charities. She's has her own cup called the Billie Jean Cup. It's like the Davis Cup, but it's for women. Outspoken for women's rights, equal pay. But as a tennis player, I know she won a few majors, but that's really all I know about her. What are your thoughts on Billie Jean King and why you have her even on your top 6?
Well, I know when I started becoming aware of tennis, she was one of the big names in tennis. And of course, as you mentioned, she probably had an even bigger name as far as her activism, lobbying for equal pay for women, and also some of the other activist activities that she was involved in maybe later. I think gay rights and some other things that she was involved in. I think, to your point, I think she started that women's tennis organization, I believe, that you spoke to. I've seen her play a handful of times, I think. But when the Battle of the Sexes exhibition against Bobby Riggs, that was a huge event. That was a little bit before my time. I think that was in 73, but that was a big deal and went along the lines of her activism as far as equality for women in tennis, specifically. And as most of us know, she won that match against Bobby Riggs, and that was just a huge deal. Bobby Riggs certainly hyped it up like a classic villain. I think he was quoted as saying women, belong in the kitchen and those sorts of things, I guess, to kind of hype up, the event.
Here it is. That's the dress.
Yeah. And just, some other things to kind of hype up the event. It was certainly a huge deal. And that was certainly something that she was one of the better known things that she had going on in her career. She won 39 Grand Slam titles, 12 singles, 16 in doubles, and 11 in mixed doubles. Her French Open win in 1972 made her only the fifth woman in tennis history to win the singles titles at all four Grand Slam events, a career Grand Slam. She also won a career slam in mixed doubles. She won a record 20 career titles at Wimbledon, 6 in singles, 10 in women's doubles, and 4 in mixed doubles.
Wow.
Yeah. She played 51 Grand Slam single events from 1959 through 1983, reaching at least the semifinals in 27 and at least the quarterfinals in 40. She was the runner-up in 6 Grand Slam singles events. She won 129 singles titles, and the final singles match of her career was a second-round loss at the Australia Open in 1983. She played doubles, I think, until 1990, but she pretty much retired from singles competition around the age of 40. So I didn't watch her a lot because by the time I started watching, I'm not saying she was past her prime, but you heard and saw more, from Chris Evert, and a little later in the decade, it was more about her and Martina and some of the other women that you probably saw a little bit more of than Billie Jean King. So I didn't get a chance to watch her a lot, but I know she was certainly a great player. But I think her activism and her being involved in various things off the court probably overshadows some of the things she did on the court. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm just saying that when you hear the name Billie Jean King, a lot of what you think about is her activism, and that's perfectly fine.
That's true.
But she had a great tennis career as well. So I certainly wouldn't want people to forget about that. But yeah, she's definitely one of the all-time greats. And I didn't see her play a lot. I think I saw her play a few times, but she was certainly a fantastic player. And she was one of the players that was famous beyond tennis, and that speaks to her involvement in many different organizations and activist type things off the court. So yeah, definitely a super player. Didn't get a chance to see her much, but she deserves to be in the conversation.
Well, I have to say, I feel a little embarrassed that I didn't know that she was that prolific in her Grand Slams. Now, sure, there's some mixed doubles in there, and there's some doubles which I don't really follow that much. And I think I will preface my top 4 is singles players, because if you throw in, well, I won't say it, but some players were better as double players, but 2 on my list, which Billie Jean King being one, was a fantastic doubles player, and of course the other would be Martina. Yes. Maybe the greatest, other than maybe Serena, who was with her sister, which was really unfair. Venus and Serena on the same side. That's even, but then you had Billie Jean, she won 2 majors with Martina, and that's not fair either. So Yeah, phenomenal stuff. And doubles tennis is so much different than singles. It's ridiculous. The skills are much different for doubles players than it is for singles players, which is why people can specialize in doubles and be horrible at
Yes,
singles
I've seen
because
it.
it's totally different skills.
I've seen it. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, but yeah, so I really like that about her in terms of her versatility. Let me mention something here about the French Open, because there's something to be said about the career Grand Slam, or the career winning all the four majors. And if you're not familiar with tennis, similar to golf, there are four majors in tennis. It's the same for the men and the women. And that would be the Australian Open, the French Open, or Roland Garros, they call it, Wimbledon, and the US Open. And they're all different surfaces. So Australian Open now is played on asphalt, or what do you call it, hard courts. It used to be played on grass at one point, but no longer. The French Open's on clay. Wimbledon is on grass, and US Open is also on clay courts. Hard courts. And the reason why it's so difficult to win all four is because Australian Open starts in January. So you have to have a short off season where tennis is basically it's the longest season I know of. You have like 2 weeks off, right? At the end of the season, you have your WTA championships or your ATP championships, and then you have like 2 weeks off, and then you start back up in January. And the Australian Open happens like late January. So that's hard to start. And then you have the French Open, which is in May, where it's clay, where the ball bounces higher and more rallies are in play because people can get to the ball. People who are fast or have good endurance can have longer rallies. And it's a grueling type of play. Wimbledon is on grass, which means the ball is faster. It bounces lower, so you don't have a chance to kind of have a lot of volleys. Of course, that changed because they changed the grass there to make volleys longer, but that's a whole nother discussion. But back then, it was super duper fast. A lot of serve and volleys, meaning you serve one time, you hit it back, and you smash. You run to that and smash it. It's called serve and volley. And then you have the U.S. Open, again, another surface. It's just grueling to do that. And those tournaments have 128 people in those tournaments, and they go on for 2 weeks. And it's very difficult to win those. So when we talk about these people going forward, like Serena, Martina, Graf, Evert, these guys or gals, they were special because it's very difficult to win a major for anybody. And to win four in your career is amazing. To win four on four different surfaces is incredible. So hats off to her.
Absolutely. And to win double digits in majors, that's a fantastic accomplishment. It takes a lot to just win one or a handful, but to win as many as they did is just amazing. Because to your point, the grind that it takes to get all the way through to the finals and win, especially when you think about, the conditions, is it super hot or, of course, Wimbledon, they have to deal with a lot of rain and, just the different conditions and the different surfaces. So yeah. And, playing at night, especially at the US Open. So all of those different scenarios and conditions, that you have to play through, and to be able to win them all, some of them multiple times. I mean, you're in rarefied air when you're talking about those types of achievements, and these women, certainly fit that bill. Winning all four, I guess that's a career Grand Slam. I mean, that's a fantastic accomplishment, and you're doing it on different surfaces. You're doing it in different parts of the world. You're doing it different times of the year, different seasons of the year. To get from the opening round all the way through the finals and win it against the competition that you have to go through. And also to keep yourself motivated and focused to do that. I mean, it's amazing. I know we see these younger players now that unfortunately have issues with focus as far as following through and winning like we feel they should. I think Naomi Osaka is an example of that, and I just feel bad for her and all of the struggles that she's had. She's such a phenomenal talent, and for her to not be able to maybe follow through and win more according to uh, her skill and her abilities because of some of these challenges she has is kind of sad. And hopefully one day she can get all of those things together and be able to have a great career like the ladies we're talking about now. But to be able to overcome all of those pressures and all of what goes along with being the number one player in the world, it's a lot. And I think Osaka really struggled with that. It was just, the media wants to talk to you all the time. Everybody is looking to get after you as far as getting your attention. And of course, back, during the era we're talking about, I mean, these ladies, they're on the cover of Sports Illustrated back when that was a big deal. They're on TV a lot, and just all of the attention and accolades that go along with being the number one player in the world, and to be able to tune in and focus and maintain that stature for so long. I think we'll see with all of these women how long they were number one, just so many consecutive weeks, and the strings of wins that they had. It's just sustained excellence that you just don't see every day. And I think that's one of the many reasons why they're mentioned in the same breath as far as being, one of the greats of all time.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. So, well said. So let's go to our number. I'll do my number 5. I know your number 5 is different than mine. My number 5 is actually higher than yours. But let's talk about Margaret Court. And I never saw her play, but her records are just amazing. And I'll pull up here on the screen here. She has Margaret Court. She's still around too, actually. She's 81 years old. Let me pull this up for you, Greg. Take a look at this, and let's talk about her. Had you done any research on her? Because I did not as much, but she is considered the open era, which means that this is the modern player, more or less. So she played around the 60s and to the 70s, roughly 73, 60, 73. Her first major was won in 60. Her last major was won in 73, looks like. And she also has the ranking of actually winning or having the so-called Grand Slam. It means she won all 4 majors in 1 year. I think that is correct.
Yes. Yep.
And that's only been done one other time, and that was Steffi Graf. But so Margaret Court, she was unstoppable at an era when her contemporaries were the people that are on this list. So what's your thoughts on her?
Well, I'm like you. I've never seen her play. And I'm just surprised that I never saw her play because she didn't retire until I think 1977. And certainly Billie Jean King and Chris Evert were her contemporaries, or at least later in her career. Never saw her play, but it's interesting when those other ladies are talked about when you watch these broadcasts, especially of these Grand Slam events. A lot of times the announcers will compare them to Margaret Court. And I'm like, who's Margaret Court? When I was a kid, who's Margaret Court?
Yeah.
She must be really good. Well, she was really good. Of course, considered one of the greats of all time. 24 single major titles and a total of 64 major titles, including 19 major women's doubles and 21 major mixed doubles titles, are the most in tennis history. She's one of only 3 players to achieve a career boxed set of Grand Slam titles, winning every possible Grand Slam title, singles, women's doubles, and mixed doubles at all 4 Grand Slam events. I mean, that's doing some heavy hitting there. The others are Doris Hart. I have no idea who she is. I'm sorry. And Martina Navratilova. However, Court is the only person to win all 12 Grand Slam events at least twice. And you and I talked about this before we went on air, how Billie Jean King famously beat Bobby Riggs in the Battle of the Sexes. Margaret Court played him too. I didn't know this. Also played Bobby Riggs and lost to him. It was said that she didn't take the match seriously. It was just an exhibition. But Billie Jean King took it dead serious, and she went on to beat to beat Bobby Riggs. I think Margaret Court retired at age 35, and she retired after she found out she was pregnant, I think, with her fourth child. And I believe she may have won one of those Grand Slam events while she was pregnant with I think, her third child. She either won the event or at least won some matches in that event while she was pregnant. Now, I'm hoping she was not far along. Sure. Yeah, I think she had 4 children total. And I think after she became pregnant with her fourth child, I think not long after that, she retired in 1977. And I think she was 35 years old. But no, I had not watched her play, but judging by the numbers I just read, hey, she's right up there, and she deserves to be mentioned among the names of the all-time greats. And that's too bad that I didn't get a chance to see her play. But I think in her prime, which I would say would be like the late 60s, maybe early 70s, I was either not born or very, very, very young. So I missed out on seeing her play as well. But like I said before, as a kid, when I watched Chris Evert and Martina and Tracy Austin and Pam Shriver and Yvonne Goolagong and that era, when you saw them play, especially in Grand Slam events, you would hear the announcers compare them. Oh, well, this is an impressive achievement. Only Margaret Court is the only other woman to do whatever it was. And I'm like, well, who's Margaret Court? But Margaret Court was something. And it's a shame if anybody says who's Margaret Court, because she was one of the all-time greats for sure.
So take a look at this chart here. I love these charts. These are all of her singles majors. And I've been studying this thing for the past few minutes here. And if you look at this chart here, everything that's green, she won. That's all the majors that she won. And just high level, she got knocked out of a major in her entire career twice in the second round, once in the fourth round, once in the third round, and that's it. Either she was absent, didn't show up, or she lost in a qualifier, semifinal, the finals, or she won it. And if you look at the bottom here, in 1960, she was 5-0 in majors. She only played one, but she won it. But look at 1970, the year I was born, 23-0 in majors. So she was undefeated. She won all 4 in the same year. And look, the year before that, this is absolutely ridiculous, she got to the semifinals, so she could have done it back-to-back. She could have won 8 in a row had she not lost in Wimbledon in semifinals. And then 2 years after she won 3 years after she won the Grand Slam, she did the same thing. She came to semifinals in 1973. Wimbledon, I guess, was kind of her weak one, I guess. Australian Open was her strongest. And then she retired 2 years later after winning 3 of 4 majors. So this is mind-boggling. This is mind-boggling.
Oh, yeah.
Looking at this.
She was Australian, wasn't she?
Yes.
Okay.
Australians and Americans for the longest time had the best players. That's sort of changed now. You have Germany and Spain has a lot of good players. European, that's reasons for that. But Australia and U.S. for many years, Rod Laver, that's the equivalency for Margaret Court on the men's side. He won the Grand Slam on the men's side, only one to actually do that, actually. But yeah, so interesting stuff here. Margaret Court, wow, impressive.
Absolutely. Yep. I did not know she was so great, but now I do.
All right. Well, that's so that was I chose one of yours. When you use your number 5 pick, who was that?
Number 5 was Chris Evert, I believe.
I think it was. You want to start? Or you want to start?
I can start. So
She's my number. She's my number 4, by the way. Actually, she's my number 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as I mentioned probably a couple times, Chris Evert was my absolute favorite women's tennis player. I mean, she had a grace about her and class about her, and she was very pretty. I mean, as a little kid, it's like, wow, she's pretty, So, but she was very, very good, and like I said, my absolute favorite player. She's also considered, and yes, she had a famous relationship with Jimmy Connors, who happened to be my favorite men's player, so that was convenient. She went on to marry, I think, John Lloyd. He was also a tennis player, and I think he was one of those guys that was a much better doubles player than he was a singles player, if I'm not mistaken. And I think she also married Andy Mills. I think he was a skier, if I'm not mistaken. But more about her career. Of course, she's one of the all-time greats. She won 18 major singles titles, including a record 7 French Open titles. She was dominant on clay.
Yeah.
And a joint record 6 U.S. Open titles, tied with Serena. Chris Evert was ranked number 1 for 260 weeks and was the year-end world number 1 singles player 7 times. Alongside Martina, who was her greatest rival, they dominated women's tennis for much of the 70s and 80s. She contested 34 major singles finals, a record for women's tennis. She reached the semifinals or better in 52 of the 56 majors she played, including at 34 consecutive majors from the 1971 U.S. Open through the 1983 French Open. Let me read that again.
Yeah.
Evert reached the semifinals or better in 52 of the 56 majors she played, including at 34 consecutive majors. She never lost in the first or second round of a major and lost in the third round only twice. Evert holds the record of most consecutive years, 13, of winning at least one major title. Everett's career winning percentage in singles is 89.97%, and that's the second highest in the Open era. For men or women, on clay, her career winning percentage in singles is 94.55%. Her record was 382 and 22.
Wow.
Just amazing. She also won 3 major doubles titles, 2 partnering with Martina. I had no idea. And 1 partnering with...
Yeah, I remember that.
Oh, do you? Okay. With Olga Morozova. I believe Chris Evert was around 35 when she retired. Mentioned that she won a record 7 French Open singles titles. That stood for 27 years until Rafael Nadal broke it. But I'm assuming that for women, that record still stands. She still holds the record for female players. Held the record for most clay court Grand Slam titles, 7 French Opens, and all 3 U.S. Opens played on clay. Did you know they played on clay at the U.S. Open?
I did not know that.
From 75 to 77. I was today years old when I found that out. So,
I didn't know that.
So just some records against some of her all-time great rivals. She was 6-8 versus Steffi Graf, losing the last 8 matches. So I can remember later in her career, Chris Evert kind of struggled against the bigger, very athletic type women's players like Steffi Graf. She struggled against her. And later in her career, she struggled against Martina. If you'll recall, in the early 80s, Martina got really fit. I mean, she was toned. Her cardio was off the charts, and she was almost unbeatable. So
she was.
Yeah, she was. 6-8 against Steffi Graf. 37 and 43 against Martina. I think earlier in their rivalry, Chris Evert got
dominated.
Then it kind of flipped later on. She was 8-9 against Tracy Austin. I didn't know that. She had a tough time with her. But most of the other top players in her era, she had very good winning records against. But against those ladies, she had losing records, and they were very great players, so that's understandable. But to wrap up what I've been saying about Chris Evert, and I think her nickname was the Ice Maiden. I think she was just very cool when she was out there. She didn't get rattled. I mean, she was basically, her demeanor was basically the same all the time, especially under pressure. And again, just the grace and the class that she played with, and how she carried herself off the court as well. And, it's just hard for me to not include her in my Mount Rushmore, but I think she just misses by that much, as they say. But she will always be my favorite women's tennis player, regardless of where she falls on my list. So.
Well, maybe I can change your mind, Greg. She should be in your Mount Rushmore, because
I won't have to try too hard to convince me. But yeah,
no, I mean, I think she stands above even Margaret Court. I mean, I think what Chris Evert Lloyd brought to the table was a fierce competitiveness. Not that Margaret Court doesn't have that, but I call Chris Evert Lloyd. That's what I knew her growing up.
Yeah.
Chris Evert was a expletive killer. You got Jordan, you got Kobe, no comparison with Chris Evert Lloyd. And she would literally kill you on the court, stab you in the throat, because she just had that kind of personality, and she was clutch. And the thing about her was, I hated Martina Navratilova because I loved Chris Evert Lloyd to pieces.
Yeah, I didn't like Martina either, especially
I couldn't stand
when
Martina.
Beating her,
Yeah, but they're like best friends now.
Yeah, they are.
And I watched a documentary with those two together. And the funny thing is, Martina is actually the soft, gentle, quiet one. And, but Chris was like the mean killer. But you wouldn't see that looking at them, on a Wheaties box. You would think it's the opposite. So her numbers are just absolutely unparalleled. And she came in at the right time because Margaret Court was kind of ending her career. She jumped in there, and she changed her game around just to be able to compete with Martina. So, but to get back into her game, that clay court thing was just allow her to stay in points rally. She's a baseline player, so she was an aggressive type player. So when you're playing on clay, the ball bounces higher, meaning that if it's over there, you can get to it more easily because it's still in the air, right? You have time. It's a math thing. If it's grass, it skids, it just goes, and you fat chance. If you don't there, you want to end the point quickly. But if you have a sound fundamentals and a tenacity and stamina and guts, clay is your animal. And unfortunately, we have a player now by the name of Iga Swiatek. She's from Poland. She may beat her clay court record. This woman is a killer, just like Chris Evert. And she has won, I think, 4 French Opens already, and she's going to win more. So I think that record's going to fall on the women's side. But Iga, and Chris Evert, the clay is just their master right there. So I can't say enough about Chris Evert. I bumped her down only because I love Steffi Graf so much. I would keep her up there. And I can't ignore Serena, even though I don't like her. I can't deny what she's done. But Chris Evert Lloyd, she's just definitely top 4 for me. and her doubles career is very good too as well. And where Steffi Graf doesn't have a doubles career, so you can kind of, if you don't include doubles, Steffi Graf kind of should be bumped down a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've convinced me, but yeah, I don't have any issues with Chris Evert. And when she was younger, she was called Chrissy. I remember that.
Yeah.
I think she started her open career, I think when she was like 17 or something like that. So she really broke on the scene when she was a teenager. So, but yeah, I don't have any issues with her being in the top 4. Like I said, it wouldn't take a lot to convince me because I know she just had an outstanding career. And with some of these women, it's just hard because they're so close as far as what they've achieved. But Chris Evert had a run that was pretty dominant, and you can't really deny that. So yeah, I have no issues with her being on that Mount Rushmore for me as well.
So who's your number 3? So there you have it. There's part 1. Stay tuned for next week where we actually give you the GOAT. Who is the greatest female tennis player of all time? Greg and I settle the score next week. See you then.